Hello, I'm Cara Dahl Russell. We continue our After the News at Noon series, Courtly Love and the Cult of the Virgin, entering the year 1000. Last week, we set the groundwork of this times and society before the year 1000. Today, castles and churches jostle with jousting. As we enter the 11th century, we have a culture throughout Central Europe where kings are trying to discourage the building of castles. When kings were weak, castles rose up. Once castles rose up, it was much harder for any outside force, including the king, to keep the nobility in the castles under control. This was predominantly happening in France and northern Spain, and it is this Central European area that we still associate with the tales of courtly love. Later on, it spread north to England and east to German areas. So we have one pervasive element of all rulers at this time: military might. The ruling class coming into the year 1000 was a warrior class, and aside from actual battles and hunting, the joust became a way of keeping knights and vassals in shape for more war. If you discount royalty, who could be very far away, and in the area we are discussing fairly ineffective as well, this warring ruling class had basically two groups. Nobility, as we've mentioned, was a term which itself was just coalescing. Counts, dukes, and barons, and the lower tier were castellans, those who owned castles, also later to become nobility, and knights and vassals. Knights were defined as having gone through a specific ceremony, usually by virtue of prowess in battle, and vassals were those who had traded their loyalty to a lord for a combination of money and goods, and possibly land to work while they were not fighting. Today, when we think of a joust, we tend to think of a fairly structured, confined event, but this is what jousting became later, towards 1300. Coming into the year 1000, jousts were large-scale, free-form battles. A noble or castellan would send invitations to one or several neighboring groups to meet in a particular field on a particular day, and then they would go at it. As far as the average person was concerned, they were in a war zone. All the ill effects of being in a war were indistinguishable from early jousts. Homes burned, crops destroyed, women abused, bystanders killed, goods stolen, and even livestock killed en masse. This was the basis of the word knight being associated with all sorts of social ills as we approached the year 1000. Other than the castellans, the other large-scale owners of property and large castle-like buildings, people who wanted their property protected during these jousts, were the clergy. Churches were subject to all the same destruction and abuse in these free-for-all jousts as everyone else. In the late 800s through the early 900s, the church had attempted to curtail the abuses by presenting the castellans with books of proper behavior called courtesy books. These were basically rules of all the things that knights should not do. As a precursor to the code later called chivalry, they are interesting, but they were massively ineffective for a variety of reasons. They were written in Latin, and very few non-clergy could read any language. Even nobility were rarely literate, and aside from being a list of no-nos, they relied on self-policing. The same people causing the problem had to enforce the no-no list. Take a moment to notice here the seeds of dissension between secular leaders and church leaders, the two major landowners in Europe, taking root even before the year 1000. The clergy, having handed these Latin courtesy books to illiterate castellans and knights to no effect, the church then decided to call meetings of the nobles and castellans to agree to the peace of God. Proclaimed in the year 989 in southern France at the Council of Charroux, they agreed that defenseless groups would be granted immunity and safety during jousts and battles. These groups included women, children, peasant men, their property, and their animals, and it also included the protection of clergy and churches. The clergy used all the power of relics and threats of eternal damnation to win the agreement. either because the clergy was heady with power over the success of the peace of God, or perhaps because of the relative ineffectiveness of this first agreement. In 1027, the church called another council to agree to the truce of God. This included all the initial exemptions and added days off from battle, and certain times of year when no fighting should occur. Sundays off, Christmas and Easter off. Sound familiar? Both the peace of God and the truce of God were ultimately ineffective for the same reason as before. They relied on the agreement of the people who were causing the problem and their continued will to change their own behavior. But these ideas started to sow the seeds of the thought process that nights could be something different. They could be something better.